The fluorescent lights of the terminal cast cold streaks across Damien Cross's sun-darkened skin, as if he were standing in an interrogation room. He stood motionless at Gate 27 of Oakland International Airport. The chatter behind him faltered for a beat when a few passengers' eyes slid over him, quick glances, but edged with caution, as though they had just walked past a living statue. In his right hand, he held a black leather briefcase. No logos, no patterns, but every stitch and every polished panel gleamed under the light, silently declaring, this was not an object for ordinary men. His navy suit fit his tall, lean frame with precision, every crease tailored to sharpen an image of composure and severity. With such bearing, Damien could easily be mistaken for a senator bound for Washington or a diplomat leaving a summit. Yet to some watching eyes, he was still only a potential problem. The loudspeaker boomed through the terminal. Final boarding call, Sierra Airways, Flight 180. Damien drew a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and stepped toward the gate. He gave a slight nod to the attendant, who didn't bother to look up. She passed his boarding pass under the scanner, letting it slide through with indifference. First class 2A. Damien walked the jet bridge with measured steps. For nearly 30 years, he had honed this steadiness, the armor he needed to endure the suspicious looks that had followed him since he first stepped into the world. The door to first class opened, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The scent of genuine leather, the hushed hum of the air system, and the amber glow of lights designed to the cradle egos that believed they belonged here. Damien entered, and time folded back. Evelyn Park stood at the threshold, every strand of her hair in its proper place, her uniform flawless. Her eyes narrowed slightly when they met his. For a fleeting moment, the mask of welcome aboard slipped, revealing what lay behind. Suspicion. Boarding pass, sir. Evelyn's smile was polite, but strained. Damien paused. His ticket had already been scanned at the gate. The procedure did not call for this step again. He understood exactly what her tone meant, a request disguised as courtesy, carrying the scent of doubt. Still, he did not argue. Of course. His voice was low, calm, as though this were nothing more than a small test. Damien pulled the ticket from his pocket and handed it over, his eyes never meeting hers. She glanced down, up, then down again. First class? Her head tilted, her smile rigid. Damien gave the faintest smile, nodding. Yes, 2A. Evelyn nodded slowly and stepped aside. Welcome aboard. He walked past her, leaving behind an invisible tremor in the air. Passengers watched silently, their eyes mixing curiosity with mistrust. Damien lowered himself into the seat, carefully placed his briefcase in the overhead, and closed it. He adjusted the cufflinks on his wrists, spine straight as a ruler's edge. Brent Saunders, a heavy-set man with sun-reddened skin in seat 2B, cast him a sideways glance before quickly turning back to the window, as if Damien's presence had made the air itself heavier. Damien had barely begun to settle when the sharp rhythm of heels returned. Evelyn reappeared, her face bearing a professional smile. I'm sorry, sir. May I also see your ID? Damien turned his head slowly. You already checked my boarding pass. Yes, but we've had a few duplicate ticket issues recently, just to be sure. Her voice was gentle, but an invisible weight pressed behind it, compelling him to comply. He handed over his ID. She bent closer, studying each letter longer than necessary. Damien Cross? She repeated the name as if testing its sound, then handed it back. At that moment, Brent leaned in, speaking low, his tone edged with insinuation. Perfect timing for an upgrade, huh? Damien's eyes went cold. Excuse me. Never mind. Just saying, economy was packed with kids crying. Guess you lucked out being bumped up here. Brent shrugged, chuckling awkwardly. Damien pressed his lips together, his voice low and sharp. I wasn't upgraded. I paid for this seat. Just like you. Brent faltered, cleared his throat, and turned away. Damien remained silent, but it was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence sharpened over years, the kind that unsettled those who faced it. 2 rows back, a young woman with her hair tied neatly and thick glasses propped up a small tripod, her phone's red recording light blinking. Lila Chen was missing nothing. Her live stream captured every glance, every word. Hundreds, soon thousands, would be watching this moment. Damien did not notice, but the times had changed. The world was no longer limited to the eyes inside this cabin. Now, the whole world could bear witness. And in that fragile hush, an unseen storm began to take shape, silent, fierce, and unstoppable. The low murmur of first class, the distant hum of the engines, seemed to fade away. Every sound drew toward the clicking rhythm of Evelyn Park's heels as she approached once more. Damien closed his eyes briefly, inhaled, then exhaled slowly. He was used to suspicious stares, but his patience had its limits. Mr. Cross, Evelyn spoke, this time accompanied by a young male attendant standing stiffly in his navy uniform. This is no arrears. We just want to resolve a small error in the seating list. Please come with us to the galley for a moment. Damien turned his head, his voice not loud but sharp enough to cut through the air. I refuse. There is no error here. Noah nodded slightly, his voice uneasy. Sir, we just want to double-check everything is fine. We need your cooperation. Damien swiveled his seat, eyes locked onto Noah. Is this standard procedure? The hesitation on the young man's face was already an answer. Sometimes when the list is mismatched, there is no mismatch. Damien cut him off. I purchased this seat under my name, directly, not upgraded, not with points, not through a third-party service. If there is an error, it does not belong to me. His words fell heavy, each one like a stone breaking the stillness of the cabin. Brent in seat 2B shifted uneasily, glancing back and forth. No one dared breathe too loudly. Behind them, Lila Chen adjusted her tripod and pressed record. Her phone screen lit up, the comment feed racing. What's happening? He clearly bought first class. Another case of profiling. Evelyn realized too late, her sharp gaze flickering. She inhaled sharply, then snapped at Lila. Young lady, stop recording the crew. That's against regulations. Lila didn't blink, her voice carrying clearly across the cabin. I'm not filming the crew. I'm recording a moment in American history. The words landed like a blade. There was no retreat. Noah stared at the manifest in his hand, then at Damien, then over at Evelyn. "Maybe we should recheck the update logs," he murmured. "There is nothing to check," Evelyn barked, clinging to authority. "He isn't listed in first class this morning." Damien leaned forward, unfastened his jacket button, and drew his phone from his inner pocket. His finger touched the screen, a green glow reflecting across his face. Noah inhaled sharply, unease prickling. "Sir, for security reasons, we need—" "Do you know what Aegis Grid Systems is, Reyes?" Damien interrupted, his voice steady. Noah blinked. I've heard of it. A cybersecurity firm." Damien set the phone lightly on his knee, its screen still glowing. "We built and run every server system behind Sierra Airways. Check-in, baggage routing, seat allocation, boarding algorithms, ID authentication. All of it runs on the Helios platform." He paused, his eyes slicing toward Evelyn. "And Helios is my design." A wave of silence rippled through the cabin. Brent's mouth fell open. Lila held her breath. Damien leaned back, his voice like steel. "For the past 5 years, I am the reason your planes have left the runway on time. I am not a passenger. I am infrastructure." He turned the phone, its display showing the words, Echo 9 Protocol, Standby. No one fully understood it, but the weight of it sat in the aisle like a bomb. "And now," Damien said, each word nailed into the air, "I will sit in this seat. If you continue, I will know this is not a system error, but a deliberate act. And I will respond accordingly." Evelyn froze. Her body stiffened like stone, her eyes drifting in a daze. Somewhere deep in her memory, a fragment surfaced. 1998. Atlanta. A young black man in a wrinkled blazer pulled from seat 4A for a discrepancy. The trainee flight attendant, just 21 then, had written the report. Passenger agitated, potentially aggressive. The name, the voice, unmistakable. But while Evelyn had forgotten, Damien never did. First class drowned in a silence that was not peace, but the still air before a storm. The air in first class thickened. The warm golden glow, meant to create an atmosphere of luxury, only served to highlight the tension etched across every face. Evelyn Park stood frozen, her eyes flickering, her hand gripping the edge of an empty seat so tightly her knuckles turned white. Damien did not look at her. He sat upright, his gaze fixed on the window. But he wasn't seeing the runway outside. He was seeing the past. 1998. Atlanta. Hartsfield, Jackson Airport. Damien was just 22 then, young and unpolished but burning with ambition. A wrinkled blazer borrowed from his cousin was the only thing that made him look presentable for his first ever first-class flight. Seat 4A. A tiny opportunity to feel like he belonged in the world of businessmen. He remembered every trembling step into the cabin, the frown of the lead flight attendant when she inspected his ticket again, the icy voice that followed, "We need further verification. Please step outside." Damien had tried to explain. He showed his boarding pass, pointed at his name, printed clearly. But 2 security officers appeared, flanking him, their voices flat and commanding. "Sir, please step off the aircraft." The entire cabin stared. Pale faces looked on without concern. some even showing irritation that their flight was delayed because of someone who didn't belong. Damien walked off in silence, each step sinking into the ground, every footfall driving a blade into his pride. Before leaving, he glanced back and saw a young trainee standing there. Her eyes held a flicker of unease, but in her hand was a pen, writing words that would scar him for years. Passenger agitated, escalated when asked to verify credentials, recommended for disembarkation. That trainee was Evelyn Park. The memory cut through his mind like a blade. Damien blinked, returning to the present. Evelyn was trembling. She struggled to maintain her cold facade, but beads of sweat glistened on her temple. Damien turned toward her, meeting her eyes for the first time. His voice was low, but each word rang like a bell. "You don't recognize me, do you, Evelyn?" Her eyelids fluttered, her throat dry. "Should I?" Atlanta, 1998. I was the young engineer pulled from seat 4A, and you wrote the report. It was your word, agitated, that haunted me for years. Evelyn's face drained of color. A shiver ran down her spine. The image of the young man with wounded eyes she had ignored resurfaced with full force. She had forgotten. She thought it was just another case, one file among thousands of flights. But to Damien, it was an open wound that never closed. The cabin was dead silent. Brent Saunders swallowed hard. Noah Reyes darted his eyes between them, confusion heavy on his face. Lila Chen never lowered her camera, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes shining bright. Damien did not shout. His voice was calm, steady, as sharp as steel. "You don't remember, but I remember every second. The way I was treated as if I were a fraud. The way I was dragged out in front of everyone. The way you stayed silent, then left a few words on paper. You forgot. But I lived with it. And it is what brought me here today." Evelyn's heart pounded violently. She wanted to say, "I was just following procedure." But the words stuck in her throat. Because in Damien's eyes, the truth was clear. That procedure had not been harmless. It had crushed a young man. Noah whispered under his breath, almost afraid of his own voice. "My God, this really happened?" Damien did not answer. He turned forward, his eyes reflecting both past and present. "Yes. And today, I return not just to fly. I return to finish the sentence that was cut short that day." His words cracked through the cabin like thunder. Lila leaned closer with her camera, whispering, This is history." Evelyn staggered back a step, her hand groping for something to hold, but finding nothing. Her uniform suddenly felt tight, heavy, like chains. Damien sat motionless, but everyone in the cabin understood. His silence was not weakness. It was the silence of someone in control. The silence of a man once humiliated who now held the keys to the sky. And in that moment, all knew. This was no longer a seating error. This was history returning, a verdict against a system that thought it could bury human memory. The sound inside the cabin seemed to vanish, leaving only the heavy breathing of Evelyn Park and the pounding of her heart in her chest. Meanwhile, Damien Cross sat upright, his phone resting lightly on his lap. On its screen, the words Echo 9, Stand by, pulsed like an electronic heartbeat, silent yet threatening. No one dared to touch. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The entire first-class cabin had transformed into a courtroom, with the accused and the judge separated only by a narrow aisle. Noah Reyes swallowed hard. He looked from Evelyn to Damien, his voice trembling. "Maybe we should report this to the cockpit. This isn't about a ticket check anymore." Evelyn snapped. "Stay quiet. I am still in charge here." But at that moment, her earpiece buzzed. A gravelly male voice came through. "Harlow here, Park. Report your status." Evelyn quickly turned away, pressing her hand to her ear. "This is Park. We have a situation. A passenger in first class is claiming to be the CEO of Aegis Grid Systems. He mentioned Echo 9 protocol, suggesting he might pose a threat to the system." Silence lingered in the cockpit for a few seconds, then a sharp intake of breath. "Oh, God!" Evelyn frowned. "What?" "Why?" The captain's voice cut in, harsh but trembling. "Do you not know who he is? That's Damien Cross. He isn't just the CEO. He is Aegis Grid. If he activates Echo 9, in less than 10 minutes the entire Helio server network goes down. Check-in, baggage, manifests, boarding, everything collapses." Evelyn froze, her whole body stiffening. She stammered, "That's impossible. Why would a man like him be sitting here?" The captain's voice dropped low, more dangerous than any shout. "And you just tried to drag him out of first class. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came. On the other end, the captain muttered, "I need to report this to headquarters immediately." Then the line went dead. In the cabin, Noah stood rooted in place. Brent Saunders turned away, pretending not to be involved, though the hand on his thigh clenched so tightly the veins stood out. Lila Chen's eyes were glued to her screen, her live stream surpassing 80,000 viewers. Comments poured in. "That's Cross, CEO of Aegis." Echo 9. My God, this is a national crisis. "We're watching history live." Damien still said nothing. He simply sat there, his gaze like ice, his shoulders steady. His calmness made the cabin tremble even more. Just minutes later, the cabin chime sounded. The captain's voice came through, this time heavy with gravity, each word deliberate, every passenger straining to listen. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just received instructions from headquarters. There is an urgent request. Mr. Damien Cross, CEO Martin Keane of Sierra Airways, wishes to speak directly with you." The cabin erupted in stunned silence. All eyes turned to Damien. Evelyn went pale. Noah stood frozen. Brent nearly choked. While Lila whispered, "Oh my God." He forced the CEO himself to call. Damien slowly set his phone down, swiping the screen to silence the Echo 9 alert, though he did not power it off. He stood, walking down the narrow aisle. Each footstep echoed against the floor like the strike of a gavel. Every passenger held their breath, watching. Some lifted their phones to record, but then lowered them again, sensing this moment was too solemn to be reduced to a clip. Evelyn stepped fully aside, her trembling hands hanging limp. As Damien passed, she gripped the armrest to keep from collapsing. In her eyes flickered something indescribable, both fear and the dawning recognition of a truth she had denied for 27 years. The cockpit door swung open. The captain's voice. "Please, Mr. Cross." Damien stepped inside. The door closed behind him, sealing the cabin off. But in that fleeting moment, everyone knew. This was no longer an ordinary flight. This was a trial, an earthquake, a turning point. Inside the cockpit, the screen lit up with the strained face of Martin Keene. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie loosened, sweat gleaming on his forehead. "Mr. Cross," he began, his voice quivering between fear and desperation. "I want to extend my personal apology for what just happened." Damien did not blink. His reply was short, his voice heavy as judgment. "Are you apologizing to me, or to the idea of me?" Silence followed. Outside, more than 100,000 people were watching live from Lila's phone, waiting for the answer. The cockpit, already confined, seemed to shrink further under the invisible weight of the conversation about to unfold. On the screen appeared the gaunt face of Martin Keene, CEO of Sierra Airways. His tie was loosened, his eyes weary, yet tense, like a man holding a nation on the brink of paralysis in his hands. "Mr. Cross," Martin began, his voice hoarse, "I want to extend my apologies for what just happened. It was a misunderstanding, Damien cut him off, his tone sharp as a blade, though he never raised his voice. "Do not call it a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. Time after time, people like me are met with suspicion, and every time you call it an isolated incident." Martin faltered, his lips trembling. He inhaled deeply, trying to gather the composure of a CEO overseeing tens of thousands of employees. I admit, this is our fault. I have already ordered the immediate suspension of Chief Purser Evelyn Park, pending investigation." Damien tilted his head, his eyes darkening. "No, you have not suspended her. You are still thinking about it, waiting for the crisis to pass, hoping I will sit quietly and swallow it like I did 27 years ago. But I will not be silent again." Martin swallowed hard. Behind him, the blurred figures of legal counsel and communications directors gestured frantically off. Screen. But he could not mute the call. He could not hang up. Echo 9. Still glimmered somewhere in the system like a ticking bomb. Damien sat upright, his hands clasped. His voice was steady, each word deliberate. "I want 3 things, and I want them now, not in a press release next week, not in a reform plan next quarter. Now, while I am still sitting on this flight." Martin's body tightened, his breath quickened. 3 things. "First," Damien said, his words striking like a hammer, "is the public suspension of Evelyn Park, immediately, pending investigation. Public, Martin, so everyone sees, so. Not a quiet note buried in internal memos." Martin bit his lip. After a brief pause, he nodded. "Fine. I will issue the suspension immediately, effective now." "Second," Damien continued, "an independent audit of every first-class incident in the past 5 years. I want every report released publicly, so passengers know the truth. How many times people like me were dragged out of seats they paid for." Martin frowned, clearly unsettled by the demand. "Damien, that would be an enormous volume of data, and this is not about data. It is about will. Damien interrupted, his eyes unwavering. "If you hesitate, it means you have learned nothing." Martin glanced off. Screen, where his advisors were signaling wildly. He exhaled sharply, then nodded slowly. "Fine. I will approve an independent audit, and I will make the findings public." Damien gave a small nod. "Good. Third, the immediate creation of an independent reporting channel for passengers, separate from the authority of flight crews. Passengers must have a way to file complaints, alerts, or reports directly, without being filtered by the very people who are the cause of the problem. Launch it now. No delays." Martin opened his mouth to object, but then his shoulders slumped. He knew this was unavoidable. "I agree." Damien leaned forward, his gaze piercing through the screen. "You will announce these 3 measures right now from Sierra Airways' official account, while I am still on this flight. If not, you know what will happen." Martin squinted, a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. Silence hung for a moment. Then he nodded, each word weighed down. "Fine. I will." Damien leaned back in his seat, locking his phone, and for the first time since boarding, his shoulders eased. "Good. Then we have a solution." On the other side of the screen, Martin signaled to his team. Fingers flew furiously across keyboards, the glow of screens reflecting in their eyes. Minutes later, the phones of every crew member, every passenger, every employee at airports nationwide buzzed simultaneously. The announcement appeared clear. Sierra Airways confirms immediate suspension of Chief Purser Evelyn Park, initiation of an independent audit of first-class incidents over the past 5 years, and immediate launch of an independent passenger reporting channel. The first-class cabin rippled with shock. Phones lit up across the rows. Gasps, whispers, a few hesitant claps broke the silence. Lila Chen nearly burst into tears, whispering into her lens, "You are witnessing history being written right now." Damien inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. He did not smile. This was not a victory. It was only the beginning. Out there, the entire U.S. aviation system was reeling. But inside the first-class cabin of Flight 180, for the first time, there was a man who would no longer be forced out of his seat. The sound of phone notifications erupted all at once like a chaotic orchestra. Each screen lit up with the same message. Sierra Airways announces reforms. Immediate suspension of Chief Purser Evelyn Park. Independent audit of 5 years of first-class incidents. And immediate launch of an independent passenger reporting channel. In the first-class cabin, sharp intakes of breath rippled through the rows. Brent Saunders sat frozen, his face flushed crimson with shock, his hands stiff as stone. He whispered, almost to himself, "My God, he just forced the CEO to his knees in under an hour." Lila Chen was on the verge of tears. Her live stream had surged past 150,000 viewers, the comments pouring in. "This is history. He did what no one else dared." Damien Cross, remember the name. At the back of the cabin, Noah Reyes stood rooted, his face pale with disbelief. His legs trembled, not from fear of Damien, but from the realization that he had just witnessed a man once doubted and humiliated transform in mere minutes into someone who rewrote the rules of an entire industry. Damien returned to seat 2A. He sat down, buckled his belt, his cold eyes sweeping across the cabin. No one dared meet his gaze, except one. Evelyn Park. She still stood frozen, as if her legs had been nailed to the floor. Her face was ghostly white, her lips pressed so tight they bled. In all her years in aviation, she had never endured a moment like this. The uniform that once served as her armor now weighed on her like chains. Damien opened his leather case and drew out a yellowed sheet of paper, folded in quarters. He carefully unfolded it on the tray table in front of him. The faded print was still legible. Passenger appeared agitated, escalated when asked to verify credentials, recommended for disembarkation. He lifted the paper and held it toward Evelyn. "Do you remember the signature at the bottom?" Evelyn stepped closer, her trembling hands taking the page. Her eyes scanned to the final line. "Filed by trainee Evelyn Park." A choked sob broke from her throat. She staggered back half a step, her hand flying to cover her mouth. I don't remember. I don't remember writing this." Damien's gaze was steady, his voice heavy as stone. "But I remember. Every word, every glance, every second." The cabin fell into a suffocating silence. Everyone understood. This was not just about an incident. This was an indictment of memory. Noah bowed his head, exhaling deeply. Brent turned away, unable to bear the sight. And Lila, her 17-year-old eyes shimmering, whispered to the tens of thousands, still watching. "This is not just justice for one man. This is justice for thousands of forgotten memories." Evelyn clutched the paper, tears welling. She whispered, trembling, "I was only following procedure. I was too young." Damien cut her off, not with anger, but with finality. "I followed procedure too. I presented my ticket. I showed my ID. I sat in the seat I paid for, but to you, nothing was ever enough. I was branded agitated. That word followed me for years, in every interview, in every moment of doubt. It never died. It clung to me. And you forgot." His voice lowered, but its weight pressed into every listener. "That is the difference between the one who causes harm and the one who carries it." Evelyn's shoulders collapsed. Tears streamed down her face, smearing the carefully applied makeup. She searched the cabin for a sympathetic glance, but none remained. Everyone had seen the truth. This was no longer a powerful chief purser. This was a person facing her own mistake. Damien slipped the paper back into his case. He needed no more words. His silence was the final verdict. The familiar ding of the intercom broke through the air. The captain's voice followed. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." The plane began to roll forward. The cabin vibrated gently, but the hum of the engines could not drown out the tense stillness where every breath echoed like a drumbeat. Damien leaned back, eyes closed, letting the roar beneath the wings carry him. For the first time in 27 years, he remained in his first-class seat. No one could drag him from it. Not anymore. From the row behind, Lila whispered into her lens, her eyes glistening. He didn't just reclaim his seat. He reclaimed it for everyone who was ever told they did not belong. And so the flight began, not only lifting off from Oakland's runway, but leaving behind a shadowed past and soaring into a new chapter. A chapter of reckoning, a chapter of change. The roar of the engines beneath gradually steadied as the Boeing 787 leveled into the night sky. The first-class cabin glowed in soft amber light. But that manufactured calm could not erase the tremors of what had just unfolded. No one spoke above a whisper. Each passenger sat within their own silence, as if fearing that even one word might awaken the past again. Damien Cross sat upright in seat 2A. His phone screen was dark, Echo 9 dormant, as if it had never existed. Yet everyone knew it was still there, like a beast merely sleeping. His eyes closed, one hand resting lightly on his leather case. He breathed slowly, steadily. A hesitant figure appeared in the aisle. Noah Reyes, face pale, clutching a bottle of water. He leaned down. "Mr. Cross, do you need anything else?" Damien opened his eyes, studied him for a moment. "No. Thank you." Noah hesitated, then slid onto the edge of the empty seat beside him. His voice was low, trembling. I want to apologize." I stood there. "I told you it was procedure. But the truth is, I knew it was wrong. I just didn't dare disobey." Damien did not interrupt. He let the young man spill his guilt. "All these years as a flight attendant, I told myself that neutrality is professionalism, that if I stayed calm, detached, never intervened, I'd be safe. But tonight I realized neutrality is complicity." Noah's eyes reddened, his head bowed. "I'm sorry." Damien exhaled slowly. "You're not the first to think silence is an answer. But let me tell you something. Silence always comes with a price. And more often than not, that price is paid by someone else." Noah nodded hard, tears slipping free, then rose quietly and left, setting the bottle on the tray as an awkward offering of repentance. Behind them, Lila Chen had folded her tripod. Her live stream had just ended, peaking at over 200,000 viewers. She clutched her phone, her young eyes ablaze with a fire she had never felt in herself before. She stepped closer, voice soft but steady. "Mr. Cross?" Damien turned his head, his expression softening slightly when he saw she was just 17, yet brave enough to speak in the storm. "Thank you," Lila said, her voice shaking but firm. "Thank you for not backing down. This means more than you know." Damien tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She bit her lip, summoning courage. "My father was an engineer too. He was brilliant, kind. But no one listened. He was pushed aside from big projects, branded difficult. Slowly, he grew silent. Then he left his job, and eventually, he lost faith in himself. He never had the chance to speak his truth. But tonight, when I saw you do this, I felt as if someone finished the sentence my father never could." Damien sat motionless, his eyes glistening faintly. He whispered, "What was your father's name?" "Daniel Chen." In that instant, Damien froze. A memory surged back. The basement office of Interface Systems, 2003. A quiet man with thick glasses, always alone by the servers, coding through his lunch hour. Damien had walked past him dozens of times, always polite, always overlooked. "I knew him," Damien murmured. "He was better than half the people sitting upstairs, but they never saw it." Lila nodded, tears spilling, but her lips curved in a trembling smile. Yes, and now the whole world is seeing you. Her words rang like a tolling bell, not only for Damien, but for everyone in the cabin who had just witnessed a first-class seat transform into a pulpit of justice. Evelyn Park sat frozen at the jump seat near the door. Her face was etched with lines of pain, her eyes wet, but she dared not weep before the passengers. She understood now that no one saw her as the airline's representative anymore. They saw her as part of the problem. Damien leaned back, eyes half closed. The wound from 27 years ago still throbbed within him, but for the first time it no longer strangled his breath. Because he knew that memory, cruel as it was, had become the fuel that allowed him, here in this cabin, to turn silence into a voice. Outside, the sky stretched wood and endless. The night was long. But within the cabin, a flame had been lit, and this time, no one could extinguish it. The lights in the first-class cabin dimmed, the LED strips along the ceiling fading as if signaling rest. But no one could truly sleep, not after what had just happened. In seat 2A, Damien Cross closed his eyes, his breathing steady, but not entirely at peace. He listened to the engines outside, their steady rhythm echoing like a drumbeat inside his chest. On his phone, Sierra Airways' announcement continued spreading across the system, the news already flooding the media. But he paid it no mind. The only image before him was that of the 22-year-old man he once was, dragged from seat 4A, his eyes drowning in humiliation. At the jump seat at the back of the cabin, Evelyn Park sat frozen. The report from 1998 still lay in her lap, her own signature blazing like a scarlet stain. She could not look away, as if staring long enough might erase the words. But they did not vanish. They clung to the past, and now they clung to the present. She had once been proud of her 29-year career, of serving millions of passengers across countless flights. But now it all seemed to dissolve, leaving only one sentence behind. Passenger appeared agitated. A sentence that had crushed a life. Evelyn's arm trembled. She turned to Noah Reyes, who was handing out drinks. Her voice rasped. "Noah, may I borrow your notebook?" Noah froze, then quietly nodded. He handed her a small pad and a ballpoint pen. Evelyn took them, stood, and walked slowly toward the galley. Passengers followed her with their eyes, curiosity heavy in their stares. Even Lila Chen stopped tapping her phone, watching intently. In the galley, Evelyn set the notebook on the cold steel counter. Her hand gripped the pen, sweat beading on her brow. For the first time in decades, she was writing not for procedure, not for a report, not to protect the airline. She was writing for herself. The words spilled out, jagged and trembling but true. I have worked for 29 years without once asking myself how I looked at others. Today, for the first time, I see myself clearly. I was wrong when I signed the report in 1998. I was wrong when I failed to recognize him today. I was wrong to believe procedure mattered more than people. I turned suspicion into habit, and I hurt the innocent. I am sorry. I do not expect forgiveness. I only hope there is still time to relearn how to see people. When the pen lifted, Evelyn collapsed onto the metal chair, her hands shaking violently. For the first time in her life, she felt her uniform no longer offered any protection. It was just empty fabric draped over a person who had lived too long inside the illusion of authority. She folded the page, pressing it tightly in her hand, as if letting go would make it disappear. Then she rose and returned to the cabin. Every step felt heavier than the last, yet she walked on until she reached seat 2A. Damien opened his eyes at the sound of her footsteps, stopping before him. Evelyn knelt, both hands offering the paper, her voice raw. "I know. This cannot erase what happened. But this is not for the airline, not for a report, only for you. If you wish, throw it away. But I had to write it." Damien studied her for a long moment. His gaze held no anger, and not forgiveness either. Only the cold clarity of someone who had carried a memory for 27 years. He accepted the paper, unfolded it, scanned the shaky lines. He said nothing. He simply folded it again and slipped it into the leather case beside him. Silence stretched. Evelyn remained on her knees, head bowed, shoulders trembling. No one in the cabin dared speak. Lila held her breath, her heart pounding. Noah watched from a distance, eyes wet. Finally, Damien's voice broke the stillness, quiet yet resonant like a bell. "This is not forgiveness. It is only acknowledgement. And sometimes that alone is enough for a journey." Evelyn nodded faintly, tears dripping onto the floor. She rose, unsteady, and returned to the galley. The first-class cabin sank into silence. But this time, the silence was not tension. It was acceptance. A person had fallen, a system had been unmasked, and a truth could no longer be denied. Damien leaned back in his seat, his eyes turning toward the window. Beyond, the night sky glittered with 1,000 stars. He knew no star could erase the wound of the past, but at least tonight, a new flame had been lit in the hearts of those who had witnessed. The cabin lay bathed in dim light, the steady hum of the engines carrying the Boeing 787 across the Arizona night. All seemed quiet, but it was not the kind of quiet that soothed. It was the quiet that followed a storm, heavy and lingering in every breath. Damien Cross sat in seat 2A, Evelyn Park's written confession, folded neatly and tucked inside his leather case. He did not reread it, nor dwell on it. What he held on to was not the apology itself, but the acknowledgement, rare and fragile, yet real. He opened his laptop. The glow of the screen cast sharp lines across his face, tracing decades of battles etched into every crease. His fingers typed slowly but with certainty. Dignity is not a gift. It's a return of what should never have been taken. He read it once more, then saved it. A single sentence, but one that held his entire journey, from the young engineer dragged out of seat 4A in 1998 to the CEO with the power to control the nation's skies. A line written not only for himself, but for the generations who would read it after him. Behind him, Lila Chen sat slumped in her seat, her phone still glowing. She was no longer live streaming. She only stared at the screen, watching the final flood of comments roll in. "Thank you, Damien. This is how change begins. Seat 2A forever." Her eyes blurred with tears. She thought of her father, Daniel Chen, who had spent long hours in cold server rooms, his ideas dismissed, his voice ignored. He never had the chance to prove himself right. But tonight, in some way, Damien had spoken for him. Noah Reyes moved quietly through the aisle, collecting water cups. He stopped at Damien's seat and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for showing me. Silence is not neutrality. I'll remember that." Damien nodded faintly, his eyes still fixed on the window where the stars burned across the night. At the jump seat near the door, Evelyn sat hunched, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze lost. She no longer cried. She had passed through the collapse, and what remained was emptiness. A single question pulsed in her mind. Over 9 years. How many people had she looked at with the same suspicion she gave Damien? How many times had she written agitated, crushing lives with ink on paper? In Sierra Airways' operations room in New York, screens flickered with updates. Echo 9 had been disabled, the Helios system restored. But the news did not stop there. Major outlets were already broadcasting, using footage from Lila's live stream. Headlines lit up on CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Black CEO brings down airline system after first. Class denial. Echo 9 protocol triggers aviation reckoning. Damien Cross, the man in seat 2A. The story spread like wildfire. Twitter exploded with hashtags, #Echo9, #Seat2A, #Dignity1st. Politicians called for investigations into discrimination in aviation. Civil rights groups shared the live stream, calling it a Rosa Parks moment in the skies. Damien knew all this, but he refused to let himself be swept away. He was not seeking praise. He only wanted to preserve the quiet inside the cabin, at least until the wheels touched the ground. A little while later, Lila approached timidly. Her voice was soft but steady. "Do you regret it, doing all of this?" Damien turned, his eyes deep, drawing in the shadows around him. "No. I only regret staying silent for too long." The young girl nodded, her eyes red but shining. "I'll tell this story. I promise." Damien looked at her, then gave a small nod. He knew the flame had been passed into another hand. The cabin remained silent, broken only by the steady thrum of the engines as the flight carried on through the long night, and far below, tens of thousands of passengers began their own journeys, unaware that the skies above them had just been rewritten by a man who chose to sit firmly in the seat that was his. That night, Damien leaned his head back, eyes closing, letting the roar of the engines merge with the rhythm of his heartbeat. In that fragile moment, he no longer felt like the young man dragged from seat 4A decades ago. He was the man who held on to seat 2A, and in doing so had given the seat back to countless others. And as the first streak of dawn pierced the window, signaling the approach of landing, Damien whispered in his heart, "This time, I will not be moved." Dawn cast a pale grey veil over the skies of Washington, D.C., as Flight 180 descended, the first light of day filtering through the windows like the curtain of a stage drawing to a close. Damien Cross sat still, his seatbelt fastened. Inside him there was no triumph, no celebration, only a quiet awareness that an old chapter had just ended. The wheels touched the runway, the vibration rippling through the cabin. Passengers stirred, rushing to grab their belongings from the overhead bins. But Damien remained seated, waiting. He had grown too accustomed to being the last one to leave, and today he chose to be the slowest. At the door, Evelyn Park stood waiting. Her uniform was as crisp as ever, but her posture was different. Her shoulders slumped, her gaze no longer sharp. When Damien approached, their eyes met briefly. There was no arrogance left, no authority, only acknowledgement. Damien gave a slight nod. Evelyn returned it, her eyes red. No words were spoken. That single nod was the period that ended one era and began another. Stepping out of the jet bridge, Damien felt the cool air sweep across his face. In the concourse, a cluster of reporters had already gathered, cameras flashing, voices rising. "Mr. Cross, can you give a statement?" He did not answer. He simply walked on, his shoes striking firmly against the tiled floor, his leather case still in hand. At the curb, a black sedan waited. The door opened, and Sophia Cross, his 19-year-old daughter, leaned out. "Dad!" she cried, her voice a mixture of worry and relief. Damien stepped into the car. Sophia threw her arms around him, her phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. "Dad, you know you're trending above the president right now. Twitter has exploded." He let out a quiet laugh, weary but genuine. "Is that so?" She showed him the screen. Countless images of him in seat 2A, Echo 9 glowing. Clips from Lila Chen's live stream, being shared millions of times. Words scrolled endlessly. Damien Cross, the man in seat 2A. Echo 9 wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Damien squeezed her hand. "And I'm proud of you, because you see me without needing me to prove anything." The car slid through the streets of the capital, glass towers reflecting the morning light. Outside, the nation was buzzing. Some hailed him as a hero, others criticized him for disrupting aviation, but all agreed it could not be ignored. 3 days later, at Sierra Airways' press conference, Martin Keane announced officially the independent audit had begun, data would be released publicly, and the independent passenger reporting channel would launch within the month. Evelyn Park had submitted her resignation. In her handwritten letter to the company, Evelyn wrote, "What we accept in silence, we endorse by choice." In that moment, I saw myself, and I did not like the reflection. I leave not because I am forced, but because I understand the time has come. Online, Lila Chen turned her live stream into a short film, shared at lightning speed. She appeared on podcasts and talk shows, speaking about the cost of silence and why a 17-year-old chose to raise her voice. Damien did not. He declined all interviews, all media requests. He returned to his office, mentoring young engineers, spending more time with Sophia, but sometimes passing through a cafe or an airport, people recognized him. "You're the man from seat 2A, aren't you?" they asked, eyes shining. He would only nod, smile faintly and move on. Because he knew, the seat did not define him. But reclaiming it, that was the moment that changed the world. Across the night sky, another flight streaked past, its lights blinking like the heartbeat of an entire system. But for those who had witnessed it from the first, class cabin of Flight 180, They understood. The sky would never be the same again. And somewhere, a man once branded agitated now sat firmly in his rightful seat, reminding everyone that sometimes by simply staying where you belong and refusing to move, you can shift the axis of the world itself. You've seen it yourself, from a single seat, 2A, that seemed meaningless. Damien Cross forced an entire airline giant to bow its head and change. But the real importance was never in that seat. It was in the memory, in the wound that lasted 27 years, and in the moment one man decided, "This time I will not stand up." He did not need to shout. He did not need to cause chaos. He simply remained seated and turned his sentence into a declaration that made the whole world listen. And now, the question is no longer for Damien. It is for you. If one day you are pushed out of the place that rightfully belongs to you, not because of a mistake, but because of prejudice, will you walk away in sorts, or will you stay to change the entire room? If this story touches you, hit like to show your support, share so others can see, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the stories to come, where a single small moment can shake the world. And leave a comment below. What would you do if you were in Damien's seat 2A? Because sometimes your answer might be the beginning of an even greater change.